How y'all doing? In June of 2020, a sweet coworker of mine here at Belay came to me and said, I'd like to talk to you. I need to know more about your background. I said, okay. We hopped on Zoom, and one of the first things that I said to her was, I'm uncomfortable in a room full of white people. It was about this awkward. So to better understand my story and experiences and why a room full of white people makes this white girl uncomfortable, we need to go back to Savannah. I'm sure many of you have been to Savannah. I love Savannah. I was born and raised there. Love, love, love it. You need Rex, I'm your girl. But there's the Savannah that tourists typically see, and then there's the Savannah that you know if you grew up there. Savannah is all about history. And so to share my story, I need to share a little history as well. I grew up understanding that based on my family tree, I could have grown up to be a very hateful person. This is my great-great-grandfather, Samuel. He is on my mother's side of the family. He fought in the Confederacy in the Civil War. Sam's son, Theo, we believe, was a member of the KKK in South Carolina. This is my great-grandfather, Adolf. He is on my father's side of the family, and he was a captain in the German army in World War II. I don't have time this morning to go into the complexities, but again, based on my family tree, I could have been raised to be a very hateful person. Then we fast forward to my parents. They're so cute. Look at them. My mom did not know a single black person until she was 21. She grew up in Doraville in the 50s and 60s and moved to Savannah, starting her teaching career. In 1972, Savannah was integrating their schools. My mom found herself teaching in a predominantly black community, and that black community embraced my mother, and she embraced them, and she never let go. My dad was on the other side of town. He grew up surrounded by a lot of racist family members. He had a rather rough childhood, and by the time he was 16, he was living on his own in a shack in the woods with no electricity, with a dog named Bones, who slept with him in the colder months to keep him warm. He was going to school where there were race riots on a daily basis, making the national news. Fast forward a few years later in the late 70s, and what brought my parents together was music. They met doing musical theater, and they were both chorus teachers in Savannah, so you can imagine the amount of music that I grew up with in my home. One of my favorite musicals as a kid was South Pacific. There's a song called You've Got to Be Carefully Taught. These lyrics encapsulate the difference in how my parents chose to raise my family versus previous generations in our family tree. I could have had an entirely white-centered childhood had my parents chosen to follow the trends within the white community in Savannah. Due to things like redlining, white flight, private schools opening under the guise of religious education, I could have grown up just like my mother, not knowing a single person of color. Instead, I was raised immersed in the black community. If you ask an 80s kid, look at that fit. If you asked an 80s kid, what were they doing on Saturday mornings? Probably watching Saturday morning cartoons, right? Not me. I was watching Soul Train. My mom loved James Taylor, my dad loved Pavarotti, and then here I was, glued to the TV, watching the dance moves and the sounds of everyone on Soul Train. Where I come from, if your rearview mirror does not vibrate when you're driving, your bass is not high enough. Where I come from, shoes hang strategically from the power lines. Where I come from, if someone yells shotgun, they're not calling the front seat of the car ride. And where I come from, I know I'm not supposed to bring the potato salad or the mac and cheese when I'm invited to the cookout. Not only were my classmates diverse growing up, but my first memories of church involved black and white people worshiping together. And that memory has wrecked my life in the most beautiful way. I think when we let him, God breaks our hearts for the things that break his heart. The marginalization and the mistreatment of people of color in our country is something that deeply breaks my heart, and I know that a big part of that stems from the deep relationships that I've had throughout my life with people who did not look like me, but who are equal image bearers of our Creator. If you want to know what room I am comfortable in, it looks more like this. This is the dance team that I coached when I taught in Savannah. Previous to working at Belay, I taught high school English for 13 years, and 5 of those years were at my old high school in Savannah. On the first day of school, every year, I had to let them know, listen, I'm clearly a white girl, but I'm from Virginia Avenue. Do not mess with me. People knew in Savannah, if you grew up on a state street, you were hood, like just bottom line, so don't even, right? I got asked every year, you rap? No, I do not. But I do love hip hop, and I would often incorporate that into our poetry unit. Eventually, I moved to Hall County and experienced my own culture shock. I found myself surrounded with a lot of white people, along with a beautiful Hispanic community. I had to shift from talking about Beyonce, Lil Wayne, Proud Family, to talking about country music, bachata, and I had to read Twilight because my kids kept asking, are you Team Jacob? Team Edward? We need to know these things. I had no idea. On the first day of our poetry unit one year, I'm passing out papers, going down the line, and I see a hand go up in the corner of my eye. Yes, Natalie. Miss Johnson, who's Tupac Shakur? Natalie, do you mean who's Tupac Shakur? I was not in Kansas anymore. Fast forward a few more years, and I'm working from home. It's 2020. In the wake of George Floyd's murder, I felt called to action, but we're in the midst of a pandemic. It was tricky. I offered to lead a book study and call it the Do Better Book Club. I shared the idea on social media and had about 20 people commit. In that group, we had Black, white, Latina, we had men and women, we had people ranging in their ages from 20s to their 60s, and we had members who were both straight and members of the LGBTQ+ community. We read 4 books in 4 months, meeting Monday night on Zoom and sharing what we had learned during the week. I think that when it comes to changing the world, you cannot do it alone. Every person who was part of that group learned about doing better. And Dr. Maya Angelou has taught us all, when you know better, you do better. I've learned in recent years to not just listen to my friends of color, but to amplify their voices and to share their stories. This is a post from my friend Joseph, a young Black man. This was summer of 2020. Seeing that post punched me in the gut. As a white Southern woman, I have to be honest with myself when it comes to what someone who looks like me represents for so many people of color. For centuries, white women have weaponized our positions, our tears, our privilege against people of color. For so long in our country, people of color have been silenced. They have been told that their voices, that their stories and humanity do not matter. I've seen the effects in my own classrooms of what a child's worldview is when he or she is not taught to value the cultures, stories, and histories of other people. We choose to live in a neighborhood with Black, white, Hispanic, Asian community. My daughter comes home from school and talks about how she loves hearing her classmates speak in Spanish. When we see a person of color, she will often comment on how beautiful their skin is. You've got to be carefully taught. I'm not an expert on hardly anything, except for maybe Romeo and Juliet. If your kids need help, I'm your girl. Shakespeare told us that all the world is a stage and all the men and women are merely players, right? Mr. Keating in Dead Poets Society reminded us of Walt Whitman's words, "The powerful play goes on. What will your verse be?" I hope that my verse and life will have something to do with encouraging others to recognize that we're all image bearers of our Creator. We all deserve dignity and life and the opportunity to be heard and, Lord willing, in beautiful community together. Thank you.